Hello. Right. Chapter 11. The Willpower Method. It's an accepted fact in society that it's very difficult to stop porn. Books and forums advising you on how to stop usually start off by telling you how difficult it is. The truth is that it's ridiculously easy. It's understandable to question that statement, but first just consider it. If your aim is running a mile in 4 minutes, that's difficult, and you'll have to undergo years of hard training, and even then possibly physically incapable. However, all you have to do to stop porn is to not watch it and or masturbate anymore. Nobody forces you to masturbate, apart from yourself, and unlike food or water, it isn't needed for survival. So if you want to stop doing it, why should it be difficult? In fact, it isn't. It's users who make it difficult for themselves through use of willpower or any method that forces the user to feel like they're making some sort of sacrifice. Let's consider these methods. We don't decide to become users, we merely experiment with porn magazines or websites, and because they're awful, that's right, awful, apart from our desired clip, we're convinced that we can stop whenever we want to. At first, we watch those first few clips when we want to and on special occasions. Before we realise it, we're not only visiting those sites regularly and masturbating when we want to, we're masturbating to them daily. Porn has become a part of our lives, ensuring we require an internet connection wherever we go. We then believe we're entitled to love, sex, orgasm, and the stress-relieving properties of porn. It doesn't seem to occur to us that the same clip and actors don't provide us with the same degree of arousal, and we begin fighting against the red line to avoid bad porn. In fact, masturbation and internet porn neither improves our sex lives nor reduces stress. It's merely that users believe they can't enjoy life or handle stress without it. It usually takes a long time to realise that we're hooked because we suffer from the illusion that users watch porn because they enjoy it and not because they need to. When we're not enjoying porn, which we can never do unless novelty, shock, or escalation is added, we're under the illusion we can stop whenever we want. This is a confidence trap. I don't enjoy porn, so I can stop when I want to. Only you never seem to want to stop. Because it's an addiction. It's usually not until we actually try to stop that we realise a problem exists. The first attempts are generally early, triggered by meeting a partner and noticing they aren't quite enough after the initial dates. Another common reason is noticing health effects present in daily life. Regardless of reason, the user always waits for a stressful situation, whether health or sex. As soon as they stop, the little monster begins to get hungry. The user then wants something to pump their dopamine, such as cigarettes, alcohol, or their favourite, internet porn, with the harem only a click away. The porn cache is no longer in the basement. It's virtual and accessible from anywhere. If their partner is around, or they're with friends, they no longer have access to their virtual harem, making them even more distressed. If the user has come across scientific material or online communities, they'll be having a tug of war in their mind, resisting temptations and feeling deprived. Their way to usually relieve stress is now unavailable, suffering a triple blow. The probable result after this period of torture is compromise. I'll cut down, or I've picked the wrong time, or perhaps I'll wait until the stress has gone from my life. However, once the stress is gone, there's no reason to stop, and the user doesn't decide to quit again until the next stressful time. Of course, there's never a right time because life for most people becomes more stressful. We leave the protection of our parents, entering the world of setting up home, taking on mortgages, having children, and having more responsible jobs. Regardless, the user's life cannot become less stressful because porn actually causes stress. The quicker the user passes on to the escalation stage, the more distressed they become and the greater the illusion of dependency grows. In fact, it's an illusion that life becomes more stressful, and porn, or a similar crutch, creates that illusion. This will be discussed in greater detail later, but after these initial failures, the user usually relies on the possibility that one day they wake up and just not want to masturbate or use porn. This hope is usually kindled by stories heard from other ex-users. I wasn't serious until I had a fading penetration. Then I didn't want to use porn anymore and stopped masturbating. Don't kid yourself. Probe these rumours and you'll discover they're never quite as simple as they appear. Usually, the user has already been preparing to stop and merely used the incident as a springboard. More often in the case of people who stop just like that, they've suffered a shock, perhaps a discovery by their partner, a self-spotting incident of accessing porn not of their normal sexual orientation, or they've had a sexual dysfunction and scare themselves. That's just the sort of person I am. Stop kidding yourself. It won't happen unless you make it happen. Let's consider in greater detail why the willpower method is so difficult. For most of our lives, we adopt the head in the sand, I'll stop tomorrow approach. At odd times, something will trigger off an attempt to stop. It may be concerns about health, virility, or a bout of self-analysis, and realise we don't actually enjoy it. Whatever the reason, we start to weigh up the pros and cons of porn. Sex is split into tantric, which is touch, smell, and voice, and propagative, which is orgasm. This is one of the major keys in opening our mind, and without this important distinction, there will be confusion, which leads to failure. On rational assessment, we find out with what we've known our entire lives. The conclusion is 1,000 times over, stop watching it. If you were to sit down and give points to the advantages of stopping and comparing them to the advantages of porn, the total point count for stopping would far outweigh any disadvantages. If you employ Pascal's wager, by quitting, you're losing almost nothing, with high chances of gains and higher chances of not losing. Although the user knows they'll be better off as a non-user, the belief that making a sacrifice trips them up. Although an illusion, it's powerful. They don't know why, but the user has the belief that during the good and bad times of life, the sessions appear to help. Even before starting their attempt, societal brainwashing, further reinforced by the brainwashing from their own addiction, is then combined with the even more powerful brainwashing of how difficult it is to give up. Users hear stories of those who've stopped for many months and still desperately crave it, or of disgruntled quitters who, having stopped, spend the rest of their lives bemoaning the fact that they'd love to have a session. There are tales of users stopping for many months or years, living happy lives, only to have one peek at porn and are suddenly hooked again. Users probably know several in the advanced stages of the disease, visibly destroying themselves and clearly not enjoying life, yet continuing to use. Additionally, they've probably suffered one or more of those experiences themselves. So instead of starting with the feeling, great, have you heard the news? I don't need to watch it anymore. They start instead with feelings of doom and gloom, as if trying to climb Everest. And they falsely determine that once the little monster has its hooks into you, you're hooked for life. Many users start the attempt by apologising to their girlfriends or wives. Look, trying to give up porn, I'll probably be irritable for the next couple of weeks, so try to bear with me. Most attempts are doomed before they begin. Assume that the user survives a few days without a session. They're getting back to their arousal and are starting to recover. They haven't opened their favourite tube sites and are consequently getting aroused by normal stimuli they'd previously zoned out at. The reasons they decided to stop in the first place are rapidly disappearing from their thoughts, like seeing a bad road accident whilst driving. It'll slow you down for a while, but you stomp your foot on the throttle the next time you're late for an appointment. On the other side of the wall is the little monster who still hasn't had its fix. There's no physical pain. If you had the same feeling because of a cold, you wouldn't stop working or get depressed, you'd laugh it off. All the user knows is they want to visit their harem. The little monster knows this and starts up the big brainwashing monster, causing the same person who was a few hours or days earlier listing all of the reasons to stop, to now deliberately, desperately search for any excuse to start again. They begin saying things like, life is too short, a bomb could go off, I could step under a bus tomorrow, I've left it too late. They tell you everything gives you an addiction nowadays. I've picked the wrong time. I should have waited until after Christmas, after my holiday and test, after this stressful event in my life. I can't concentrate, I'm getting irritable and bad-tempered, I can't even do my job properly. My family and friends won't love me. Let's face it, for everybody's sake, I have to start again. I'm a confirmed sex addict and there's no way I'll ever be happy again without an orgasm. Nobody can survive without sex. Brainwashed by well-meaning people who don't consider the distinction between the tantric and propagative parts of sex. I knew this would happen because my brain is sensitized by delta phos B due to changes affected by dopamine surges because of my past excessive porn use. Sensitization can never be removed from the brain. At this stage, the user usually gives in. Firing up the browser, the schizophrenia increases. On one hand, there's the tremendous relief of ending the craving as a little monster finally gets its fix. On the other hand, the orgasm is awful, and the user cannot understand why they're doing it. This is why the user thinks they lack willpower. It's not, in fact, a lack of willpower. All they've done is change their mind and make a perfectly rational decision in light of the latest information. What's the point of being healthy or rich if you're miserable? Absolutely none. Far better to have a shorter, enjoyable life than a lengthy, miserable one. Fortunately, this is untrue for the non-user, as life is infinitely more enjoyable. The misery the user is suffering isn't due to withdrawal pangs, though it's initially triggered by them. The actual agony is the tug of war in the mind caused by doubt and uncertainty. Because the user starts by feeling they're making a sacrifice, they then begin to feel deprived, which is a form of stress. One of these stressful times is when the brain tells them to have a peak, wanting to backtrack as soon as they stop. But because they've stopped, they can't, and this makes them even more depressed and sets the trigger off again. Another factor making quitting so difficult is waiting for something to happen. If your objective is passing a driving test, as soon as you've passed the test, it's certain whether you've achieved your objective. Under the willpower method, the internal narrative is, if I can go long enough without internet porn, the urge to watch it will eventually go. You can see this in practice in online forums where addicts talk about their streaks or days of abstinence. As I said before, the agony the user undergoes is mental and caused by uncertainty. Although there's no physical pain, it still has powerful effects. Now miserable and insecure, the user is far from forgetting, now full of doubts and fears. How long will this craving last? Will I ever be happy again? Will I ever want to get up in the morning? How will I ever cope with stress in the future? The user is waiting for things to improve, but while they're still moping, the harm is becoming ever more precious. In fact, something is happening, but unconsciously. If they can survive weeks without opening the browser, the craving for the little monster disappears. However, as stated previously, the pangs of withdrawal from dopamine and opioids are so mild that the user isn't even aware of them. At this time, many users sense they've kicked it and so take a peek to prove it, sending them back down the water slide. Having supplied dopamine to the body, there's now a little voice at the back of their mind saying, "You want another one." In fact, they had kicked it, but have hooked themselves again. As a child, you watched cartoons, and as per neuroscience, you formed neural pathways, or delta phosphate for them. If you wanted to discourage a child from watching, you'd study if those pathways still existed and surveyed adults on why they don't like to watch their favourite childhood cartoons anymore. For one, there's better entertainment available, and secondly, the cartoons just don't hold the magic anymore. With the willpower method, you're just denying this child the cartoon, but with Easy Peasy, you're also making sure they see no value in it. Which is better? The user won't usually get into another session immediately, thinking, I don't want to get hooked again, and allows a safe period of hours, days, or even weeks to pass. The ex-user can then say, well, I didn't get hooked, so I can safely have another session. They've fallen back into the trap. The same trap as when they first started, and are already on the slippery slope. Users who succeed using the willpower method tend to find it long and difficult because the primary problem is the brainwashing. Long after the physical addiction has died, the user is still moping around miserable. Eventually, after surviving this long-term torture, it begins to dawn on them that they aren't going to give in, stopping the moping and accepting that life goes on and is enjoyable without porn. There are significantly more failures than successes because some who succeed go through their lives in a vulnerable state, left with a certain amount of brainwashing telling them that porn does in fact give them a boost. This explains why many users who've stopped for long periods end up starting again later on. Many ex-users will have the occasional session as a special treat, or to convince themselves how strong their self-control is. It does exactly that, but as soon as their session ends, the dopamine starts to leave, and a little voice at the back of their mind begins driving them towards another one. If they decide to partake, it still seems to be under control. No shocks, escalation, or novelty seeking. So they say, marvellous. While I'm not really enjoying it, I won't get hooked. After Christmas, this holiday, this trauma, I'll stop. Little do they know that the water slides of their brain have been greased even more. Too late, they're already hooked. The trap they managed to claw themselves out of has claimed its victim again. As said previously, enjoyment doesn't come into it. It never did. If we watch because of enjoyment, nobody would stay on the tube sites for longer than it takes to finish the deed. Regardless, a better way to self-pleasure is from memories. We assume we enjoy internet porn only because we can't believe we'd be stupid enough to get addicted if we didn't enjoy it. Most users don't have any idea about supernormal stimulus, novelty, or shock seeking, and even after reading about it, they don't believe their use is motivated by evolutionary reward circuit wiring. That's why so much of porn is subconscious. If you're aware of the neurological changes and had to justify it costing you money in the future, even the illusion of enjoyment would go. When we try to block our minds to the bad side, we feel stupid. If we had to face it, that would be intolerable. If you watch a user in action, you'll see they're happy only when unaware they're using. Once they're aware, they tend to be uncomfortable and apologetic. Porn feeds a little monster, so upon purging it from your body, along with the brainwashing big monster, you'll have neither need nor desire to watch. Chapter 12. Beware of cutting down. Many users resort to cutting down as a stepping stone towards stopping, or as an attempt to control the little monster. Many recommend cutting down or a porn diet as a pick-me-up. Using cutting down as a stepping stone to stopping is fatal. It's these attempts to cut down that keep us trapped for the remainder of our lives. Generally, cutting down follows failed attempts to stop. After a few hours or days of abstinence, the user says something like, I can't face the thought of going to sleep without visiting my online harem, so from now on, I'll just use porn once in 4 days or purge my collection of bad porn. If I can follow this porn diet, I can either hold it there or cut down even further. Certain terrible things now happen. Number 1. They're stuck with the worst of all worlds, still addicted to internet porn and keeping the monster alive not only in their body but in their mind. 2. Wishing their life away waiting for the next session. 3. Prior to cutting down, whenever they wanted to visit their harem, they'd fire up their browser and at least partially relieve their withdrawal pangs. Now, in addition to the normal stresses of life, they're causing themselves to suffer the withdrawal pangs for most of their lives, which makes them even more miserable and bad-tempered. Whilst indulging, they neither enjoyed most of the sessions, nor realised they were using a supernormal stimulus. It was automatic. The only harem visit that was enjoyed was one after a period of abstinence. Now that they wait an extra hour for each harem visit, they enjoy each one. The longer waited, the more enjoyable each session appears to become. Because the enjoyment in a session isn't the session itself, it's the ending of the agitation caused by the craving, whether slight physical craving or mental moping. The longer the suffering, the more enjoyable each session seems to become. The primary difficulty in stopping isn't the neurological addiction, which is easy. Users will stop without difficulty on various occasions, the death of a loved one, family or work affairs, etc. They'll go, say, 10 days without access and it doesn't bother them. But if they went the same 10 days when they could have had access to it, they'd be tearing their hair out. Many users will get chances during their workday and abstain, or they'll pass through Victoria's Secret or swimming pools, and so on, without undue inconvenience. Many will abstain if they have to sleep on the couch temporarily to make space for a visitor, or are themselves visiting. Even in go-go bars or nudist beaches there have been no riots. Users are almost pleased for someone or something to say they cannot view porn. In fact, users who want to quit get a secret pleasure out of going for long periods without harem visits, giving them the hope that perhaps one day they'll never want it. The real problem when stopping is brainwashing. An illusion of entitlement that internet porn is some sort of prop or reward and life will never be the same without it. Far from turning you off internet porn, all that cutting down accomplishes is leaving you feel insecure and miserable, convincing you that the most precious thing on this earth is the new clip that you missed, that there's no way you'll be happy again without seeing it. There is nothing more pathetic than the user who's been trying to cut down, suffering from the delusion that the less porn they watch, the less they'll want to visit their online harem. The reverse is true. The less they watch porn, the longer they'll suffer withdrawal pangs, and the more they enjoy the relief of relieving them. However, they'll notice their favourite genre isn't hitting the spot, but that won't stop them. If the tube sites were dedicated to only one star or one genre, no user would ever go more than once. Difficult to believe? What's the worst moment of self-control one feels? Waiting for 4 days and then having a climax. Then what's the most precious moment for most users on a 4-day porn diet? That's right, the same climax after waiting for 4 days. Do you really believe that you're masturbating to enjoy the orgasm, or the more rational explanation that you need to relieve withdrawal pangs under the illusion that you're entitled to? Removal of the brainwashing is essential to remove illusions about porn before you extinguish that final session. Unless you've removed the illusion that you enjoy it before you close the window, there's no way you can prove it afterwards without getting hooked again. When hovering over bookmarks and saved pictures, ask yourself where the glory in this action is. Perhaps you believe that only certain clips are of good taste, like ones on habitual or favourite themes. If so, why bother to watch other videos or themes? Because you got into the habit? Why would anyone habitually mess up their brain and waste themselves? Nothing is different after a month, so why should a porn clip be any different? You can test this yourself. Find that hot clip from last month to prove it's different. Then set a reminder and watch the same clip after a month without porn. It will hit almost the same spots as it did last month. The same clip will be different after a social event where you're turned down or tested by a potential partner. The reason being that the addict can never be truly happy if the little monster remains unsatisfied. Where does satisfaction come into it? It's just that they're miserable if they can't relieve their withdrawal symptoms. The difference between watching porn and not is the difference between being happy and miserable. That's why internet porn appears to be better. Users who get on their sites first thing in the morning for porn are miserable whether watching it or not. Cutting down not only doesn't work, but it's the worst form of torture. It doesn't work because initially the user hopes that by getting into the habit less and less, they'll reduce their desire to watch. It's not a habit, it's an addiction. The nature of any addiction is wanting more and more, not less and less. Therefore, in order to cut down, the user has to exercise willpower and discipline for the rest of their lives. So cutting down means willpower and discipline forever. Stopping is far easier and less painful. There are literally tens of thousands of cases in which cutting down has failed. The problem of stopping isn't the dopamine addiction, which is easy to cope with, it's the mistaken belief that porn gives you pleasure, brought about initially by brainwashing received before we started using, further reinforced by the actual addiction. All cutting down does is reinforce the fallacy further, to the extent that porn dominates their lives completely and convinces them that the most precious thing on earth is their addiction. The handful of cases that do succeed have been achieved by a relatively short period of cutting down, followed by going cold turkey. These users stopped in spite of cutting down, and not because of it. All it did was prolong the agony. Failed attempts leave users nervous wrecks and even more convinced they're hooked for life. This is usually enough to keep them reverting back to the online harem for pleasure and crutch, or at least for another stretch before the next attempt. However, cutting down does help to illustrate the futility of porn, clearly demonstrating that visits to the harem are not enjoyable after periods of abstinence. You have to bang your head against the wall, suffer withdrawal pangs, in order to make it nice upon stopping. Therefore, the choices are 1. Cutting down for life and suffering self-imposed torture, which you'll be unable to do anyway. 2. Increasingly torturing yourself for life, which is pointless. 3. Being nice to yourself and cutting porn out altogether. The other aspect that cutting down demonstrates is that there's no such thing as the odd or occasional harem visit. Internet porn is a chain reaction that will last the rest of your life unless you make a positive effort to break it. Remember, Cutting down will drag you down. Chapter 13, Just One Peak. Just one peak is a myth that you must remove from your mind. It's just one peak that gets us started in the first place. It's just one peak to tide us over a difficult patch or on a special occasion that defeats most of our attempts to stop. It's just one peak that, after having succeeded in breaking the addiction, sends us back into the trap. Sometimes it's just to confirm they don't need porn anymore, and one harem visit does just that. The after effects of porn will be horrible and convince the user they'll never become hooked again, but they already are. The user feels that something making them so miserable and guilty shouldn't have made them do it, yet it did. It's the thought of one special session that often prevents users from stopping. The one after your long conference trip, hard day at work, fight with the kids, or incident where your partner rejects you for sex. Get it firmly in your mind there's no such thing as just one peak. It's a chain reaction that will last the rest of your life unless broken. The myth about the odd special occasion keeps users moping after stopping. Get into the habit of never seeing the no big deal session. It's fantasy. Whenever you think about porn, see a filthy lifetime of spending eons behind a screen for the privilege of destroying yourself mentally and physically, a lifetime of slavery and hopelessness. It isn't a crime if your erections are unreliable, but it is when you could be happier long term, but instead choose to sacrifice that for short term pleasure. It's okay we can't always come up with something to do for the void. Doing that isn't realistically possible in every instance for our entire lives. We can plan for most of them, but sometimes it just happens. Good and bad times also happen, irrespective of porn, but get it clearly into your mind. The porn isn't it. You're stuck with either a lifetime of misery or none at all. You wouldn't be dreaming of taking cyanide just because you like the taste of almonds. So stop punishing yourself with the occasional no big deal session. Ask a user with issues, if you had the opportunity to go back to the time before you became hooked, would you have become a user? The answer is inevitably you've got to be kidding. Yet every user has their choice every day of their lives. So why don't they opt for it? The answer is fear. The fear that they can't stop or that life won't be the same without it. Stop kidding yourself. You can do it, anybody can. It's ridiculously easy, but in order to make it so, there are certain fundamentals to get clear in your mind. Number 1, there's nothing to give up, only marvelous positive gains to achieve. 2, never convince yourself of the odd no big deal or just one peak session. It doesn't exist, there's only a lifetime of filth and slavery. 3, there's nothing different about you. Any user can find it easier to stop. Many users believe that they're confirmed addicts or have addictive personalities. This usually happens as a result of reading excessive amounts of shocking neuroscience. There's no such thing. Nobody is born with the need to masturbate to video clips before they became hooked. It's the drug that hooks you, not the nature of your character or personality. The nature of addictive and supernormal stimulus makes you believe this is the case. However, it's essential to remove this belief because if you believe you're addicted, you will be, even after the little monster in your body is long dead. It's essential to remove all of this brainwashing. Chapter 14, Casual Users. Heavy users tend to envy the casual porn user. We've all met these characters. Oh, I can go all week without a session, doesn't really bother me. We wish we were like that. This might be hard to believe, but no user enjoys being a user. Never forget, no user ever decided to become one, casual or otherwise. Therefore, all users feel stupid. Therefore, all users have to lie to themselves and others in a vain attempt to justify their stupidity. Golf fanatics brag about how often they play and want to play, so why do users brag about how little they masturbate? If it's the true criterion, then surely the accolade is not masturbating at all, isn't it? If someone said to you, I can go all week without carrots, and it doesn't bother me in the slightest, you'd think you were talking to a nutcase. If I enjoyed carrots, why would I want to go all week without them? If I didn't enjoy them, why would I make such a statement? So when a user makes a comment about surviving a week without a session, they're trying to convince themselves, and you, that they don't have a problem. But there would be no need to make a statement if they didn't have a problem. Translated, this comment is, I managed to survive a whole week without porn. Like every user, hoping that after this they could survive the rest of their lives. If only able to survive a week, can you imagine how precious this session must have been afterwards, having felt deprived for an entire week? This is why casual users are effectively more hooked than heavy users. Not only is the illusion of pleasure greater, but they have less incentive to quit because they spend less time on it and are therefore less vulnerable to health risks. Occasionally, they may experience sexual dysfunction, but are unsure what caused it, and so it's blamed on other factors. Remember, the only pleasure users get is in the search and seek dopamine cycle and relieving the withdrawal pangs, as has already been explained. The pleasure is an illusion. Imagine the little porn monster as a near imperceptible itch that we remain unaware of most of the time. If you have a permanent itch, the natural tendency is scratching it. As reward circuits become increasingly immune to dopamine and opioids, the natural tendency is to edge, escalate, binge, novelty seek, shock seek, etc. There are four main factors that prevent users from chain viewing. Time, most cannot afford to. Health, in order to relieve the itch, we have to consume all free material that's available and then some. Capacity to cope with that kind of binging varies with each individual, and at different times and in different situations in their lives. This acts as an automatic restraint. Discipline. Discipline is imposed by society, by the user's work, friends and relatives, or perhaps even by the user themselves as a result of the natural tug-of-war going on in every user's mind. Imagination. The lack of imagination plays down the shock, novelty, and other values of the clip on a subjective basis. It's easy to think of non-casual users as weak, unable to understand why others are able to limit their intake. However, heavy users should keep in mind that most casual users are simply incapable of chain viewing, which requires very strong imagination and stamina. Some of these once-a-week users that heavy users tend to envy are physically incapable of doing more, or because their job, society, or in hatred of becoming hooked won't allow them to. It may be advantageous to provide a few definitions. The non-user, someone who has never fallen prey to the trap but shouldn't be complacent. They are a non-user only by luck or grace of goodness. All users were convinced they'd never become hooked, and some non-users keep trying an occasional session. The casual user, of which there are two basic classifications. 1. The user who's fallen for the trap but doesn't realise it. Don't envy such users. They're merely sampling the nectar at the mouth of the pitcher plant, and in all probability will soon be heavy users. Remember, just as all alcoholics started off as casual drinkers, so too do all users start off casually. 2. The user who was previously a heavy user and so thinks they can't stop. These users are the saddest of all, and they fall into various categories, each requiring a separate comment. The once-a-day user. If they enjoy their entitlement to orgasm, why use internet porn only once daily? If they can take it or leave it, why bother at all? Remember, the habit is in actuality banging your head against the wall to make it relaxing upon stopping. The once-a-day user relieves their withdrawal pangs for less than an hour each day. Although unaware, the rest of their day is spent banging their head against the wall, doing so for most of their lives. They're using once a day because they cannot risk getting caught or messing with their neurological health. It's easy to convince the heavy user they don't enjoy it, but significantly harder to convince a casual one. Anyone who has gone through an attempt to cut down will know it's the worst torture of all, and almost guaranteed to keep you addicted for the rest of your life. The rejected user. They demand the right to orgasm every day, but their sex partner isn't always happy to fulfill this request. Initially, they're using internet porn to fill this void, but upon taking the exciting water slide, they're trapped in a cycle of novelty shock, supernormal images, etc. In fact, they're happy with their partner's rejection, as it provides something of an excuse. If internet porn gives so much to you, why bother to have a partner at all? Set them free instead. They're not even enjoying sessions when they have to carry their partner in their mind. At some point, they're looking for their real-life partner to hand them an excuse to venture into the dark valleys of the internet. The porn diet user, also known as, I can stop whenever I want to, I've done it thousands of times. If they think dieting helps getting them into the mood to pick up partners, why are they even on the diet of once in every 4 days? Nobody can predict the future, and what if the happenstance of meeting occurred an hour after your scheduled session? Also, if occasional cleaning the plumbing is good to relieve tension, why not plumb every day? It's been proven that masturbation isn't required to keep genitals healthy, and internet porn isn't required at all. Even if that is the case, no pickup artist guru has read about the neurological damage will ever recommend watching supernormal porn. The truth is the porn diet user is still hooked. Although they're rid of the physical addiction, they're still left with the primary problem of brainwashing. They're hoping each day they'll stop for good, but soon fall for the same trap again. Most users actually envy these stoppers and starters and think about how lucky the dieter is to be able to control their usage. However, they overlook the fact that the dieter isn't controlling their usage. When they're using, they wish they weren't. They go through the hassle of stopping, then begin to feel deprived and fall for the trap again, wishing they hadn't. They get the worst of both worlds. If you think about it, this is true in the lives of users when allowed to have a session, taking it as entitled or wishing they didn't. It's only when deprived that porn becomes precious. The forbidden fruit syndrome is one of the awful dilemmas for users. They can never win because they're moping for a myth, an illusion. There's only a single way they can win: stopping moping by stopping porn. The I only watch static, tame, homemade porn user. Yes, everyone does this to start with, but isn't it amazing how the average shock value of the clip seems to rapidly increase? And before we know it, we're feeling deprived. Tolerance? The novelty lacks with static porn, so we pay the piper for a cup of grease and ride down the water slides toward resentment and guilt. The worst thing you can do is use your partner's pictures, with approval of course, for masturbation. Why? Because in the process you're rewiring your brain for the seeking, searching, and variety-induced dopamine flushes. Chemically, the porn water slides in the brain is delta phosphate building up, so you'll find yourself having difficulties when you're with them in real life. Another trust is the idea of falling more in love with the idea of them, how you imagine them to be, than they actually are in reality. And obviously our imagination can always do better. Another trap in this category is amateur and homemade porn. Most are fakes and you know it. Plus, you're also not going to stop at the very first one that hits your eyes. Instead, continuing to seek and search. Remember, it's not only orgasm the brain seeks, but the novelty of the hunt that gives the water slide its thrill. The porn content isn't the issue, whether amateur or professional. It's the flushes of dopamine in the brain, causing build-up of tolerance and satiation. Porn destroys normal brain operation. Masturbation confusing the muscle-brain response. Orgasm floods the brain with opioids and makes the pathway easier to follow the next time. The I've stopped but have an occasional peak user. In a way, peaking users are the most pathetic of all. Either they go through their lives believing they're being deprived, or more often, the occasional peak becomes two, sliding downwards on the slippery slope, sooner or later falling back to being heavy users. They've again fallen for the very trap they fell into in the first place. There are two other categories of casual users. The first is the type masturbating to images or clips of the latest celebrity sex tape hitting the news, or something that they carried home from their accidental viewing at school or work. These people are really just non-users, but they feel that they're missing out. They want to be part of the action, with most of us starting off this way. Next time, notice that after a while, the celebrity of your fantasy isn't doing it for you anymore. The more unattainable the target of your fantasy, the more frustrating the withdrawal of the orgasm is. The second category has been gaining attention recently, best described by outlining a case shared online. A professional woman who had been reading internet porn stories for many years had never used more or less than once each night. Incidentally, she was a very strong-willed lady. Most users would wonder why she wanted to stop in the first place, gladly pointing out that there was no risk of PIED or PE in her case, which is untrue. She wasn't even using static images, the stories being far tamer than any material that they themselves use on a daily basis. They make the mistake of assuming that casual users are happier and more in control. They might be more in control, but they certainly aren't happy. In the woman's case, she wasn't satisfied with her partner, nor with real sex, and highly irritable when responding to her daily stresses and strains. Her nearest and dearest was unable to figure out what was bothering her. Even if she convinced herself to be unafraid of her usage through rationalization, she still found herself unable to enjoy real relationships, which invariably involve ups and downs. Her brain's reward circuit was unable to make use of normal distresses present in life as a result of daily dopamine flooding. Subsequent down-regulation of her brain receptors had rendered her melancholic under most circumstances. Like most, she had a great fear of pornography's dark side and treatment of women before her first time. Eventually, she fell victim to societal brainwashing and tried her first sight. Unlike most who capitulate and become chain users, upon seeing the foul clips of violence, she resisted the urge, and she resisted the slide. All you ever enjoy in porn is ending the craving that started before ever watching it. Whether the almost imperceptible physical craving or the mental torture of not being allowed to scratch the itch, internet porn itself is poison, which is why you only suffer the illusion of enjoying it after periods of abstinence. Similarly to hunger or thirst, the longer you suffer it, the greater the pleasure when finally relieved. Making the mistake of believing porn is just habit, they think, if I can keep it down to a certain level or only on special occasions, my brain and body will accept it. Then I can keep using it at that level or reduce it further should I wish to. Get it clear in your mind. The habit doesn't exist. Porn is drug addiction, with the natural tendency being to relieve withdrawal pangs, not enduring them. To hold it at that level you're currently at would require you to exercise tremendous amounts of discipline and willpower for the rest of your life. As your brain's rewards system becomes tolerant of dopamine and opioids, it wants more and more, not less and less. As porn begins to gradually destroy your nervous system, courage, confidence, and impulse controls, you become increasingly unable to resist reducing the interval between each session. This is why in the early days, we can take it or leave it. If we get a sign of something amiss mentally or physically, we just stop. So don't envy this woman. When you watch only once every 24 hours, it appears to be the most precious thing on earth, turning porn into a forbidden fruit. For many years, this woman had been at the center of a tug-of-war. Though unable to stop, she was frightened to escalate to streaming clips. For 23 hours and 10 minutes of every one of those days, she had to fight the temptation and lack of feelings towards her boyfriend. It took tremendous willpower to do what she did, eventually reducing her to tears. Such cases are rare, but look at it logically. Either there's a genuine crutch or pleasure in porn, or there isn't. If there is, who wants to wait an hour, a day, or even a week? Why should you be deprived of the crutch or pleasure in the meantime? If there's no genuine crutch or pleasure, why bother paying a visit to your online harem? Here is another case of a once in 4 days man describing his life as follows. I'm 40 years old. I've suffered PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction with real women and even when using porn, which is most of the time. It's been a while since I had a full erection. Before going to the once in 4 porn diet, I used to sleep soundly through the night after my session. Now I wake up every hour of the night and it's all I can think about. Even when asleep, I dream about my favourite clips. On days after my scheduled session, I feel pretty down, the diet taking up all of my energy. My SO would leave me alone because I'm so bad-tempered, and if she can't leave, she won't have me in the house. I go for jogs outside, but my mind is obsessed with it. On a scheduled day, I begin planning earlier in the night, getting very irritated if something happens against my plans. I'd back out of conversations and give in, only to later regret at work and at home. I'm not an argumentative guy, but I don't want the topic or conversation to hold me down. I remember occasions when I pick silly fights with my SO. I wait for 10 o'clock, and when it arrives, my hands are shaking uncontrollably. I don't start the deed right away, as there are new videos that have been added and shop around. My mind tells me that since I've starved myself for 4 days, I deserve a special clip that has to be worth the time spent searching. Eventually, I settle for 1 or 2, but want it to last so that I can survive through the next 4 days. So I take more time to finish the deed. In addition to his other troubles, this poor man has no idea that he's treating himself to poison. First, he's suffering forbidden fruit syndrome and then forcing his brain to flush dopamine. Comparatively, his dopamine receptors aren't as cut down, but he's greasing the porn water slides, searching for edging novelty, variety and shock and anxiety in order to survive the next 4 days. You probably picture this man as a pathetic imbecile, but this isn't so. As a former athlete and Marine sergeant, he didn't want to become addicted to anything. However, upon returning from war, he trained as an IT technician in a veterans rehab program. When entering the civil workforce, he was a well-paid IT professional in a bank and was given a laptop to take home. It was the year that famous socialites leaked their porn videos online, and there was much talk about it. He then got hooked, spending the rest of his life paying through the nose and ruining himself physically and mentally. If he were an animal, society would have long since put him down out of his misery, yet we still allow mentally and physically healthy young teenagers to become hooked. You may think this case and notes are exaggerated, but this case, while extreme, is far from unique. There are tens of thousands of similar stories. Can you be sure that none of his friends and acquaintances envied him for being a once-and-for man? If you think this couldn't happen to you, stop kidding yourself. It's already happening. Like other addicts, porn users are notorious liars even to themselves. They have to be. Most casual users indulge far more times and on far more occasions than they'll admit to. Many conversations with so-called twice-a-week users will admit they've done it more than 3 or 4 times that week. Read Reddit, NoFap, and rebooting forum stories from casual users, and you'll find that they're either counting days or waiting to fail. You don't need to envy casual users, and you don't need to use either. Life is infinitely sweeter without it. Take the following log. It started with a simple challenge to not touch my junk for a day and being unable. I don't think about masturbation anymore. It doesn't cross my mind. That is possible, I promise you. The riches that await those who are able, they're incredible. Teenagers are generally more difficult to cure, not because they find it more difficult to stop, but because they don't believe they're hooked or are at the initial stages of the trap, generally suffering from the delusion that they'll automatically have stopped before the second stage. Parents of children who loathe internet porn shouldn't have a false sense of security. All children loathe the dark sides of porn before becoming hooked. At one point you did too. Don't be fooled by scare campaigns either. The trap is the same as it always was. Children know that internet porn is supernormal stimulus, but they also know that one visit or peek won't do it. At some stage, they may be influenced by a partner, classmate, or a work colleague. Please do not become complacent in this matter. Society's failure to prevent adolescents from becoming addicted to internet porn and other drugs is perhaps the most disturbing facet of this addiction. Adolescent brains are significantly more plastic, and it is necessary to educate and protect them. If you're unsure where to start, good resources include the yourbrainonporn.com book to educate yourself on the neuroscience. Even if you suspect your teenager might be already hooked, the book provides foundational understanding in helping someone to escape. Otherwise, recommend this book. And then my own personal recommendation would be checking out the website Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug, check out their YouTube as well, they are brilliant. There's a lot of facts. We are on to chapter 15, which is the user, Twitch and Instagram user, and we will pause it for now.